Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be.
And we are live. Tim Crowder. Welcome back to the Canadian Story. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, Zach. Good to see you again. How you doing?
Good. I'm doing really, really well. It's a beautiful day here. The blue sky is out, and so anytime that happens, I feel good.
I hope our conversation today won't ruin that good mood. But I may have some startling things to share with you.
I can feel the rain clouds already.
yeah. Focus on the blue sky.
Yeah.
Focus on the blue sky.
Ignore the tornado. Tim, for those of the listeners who don't know you, aren't familiar with you, who are you? What are you all about? Tell us about yourself.
Okay. Well, starting just with credentials, 27 years in business, and to cut to the what I've been doing in the simplest terms. I'm a person who's been focused on big, meaty business issues for my entire career at a senior level. And it's been my job to understand these issues, to understand what's behind these issues, to go deep and to come up with solutions that are workable. So basically, I've lived analysis for over 27 years.
Right.
Which is actually interesting and exciting.
It sounds like it seems as though it would make you a very valuable man to have on a team.
Thank you. I for the last 27 years, it's been very interesting, and I think there's been a great deal of success. And I've been most recently trying to apply that lens to public issues as well.
Right. So there are a number of public issues on the docket that we're going to try to get to here. I would love to start with maybe the most shocking piece of news I've seen come out on a national level. In the last two weeks sort of thing, this 30% restriction on fertilizer use. What do you know about that?
Well, it's something that actually has not just got my attention, but has led to a little bit of lack of sleep, frankly. This is an issue that Canadians should be very much aware of. When you start to play with fertilizer, you start to play with food security. And when you start to play with food security, people's lives get impacted very quickly. The issue that we're seeing here in Canada is there is a proposal to reduce the amount of fertilizer that's being used on farms to reduce global emissions from that fertilizer, particularly nitrogen. And it's also intended to transform our agriculture. The desire behind this is dubious. The impacts are unknown by those proposing it, and it's at the exactly perfectly inopportune time, the worst possible time for us to even be discussing this, in which we'll go down this rabbit hole in some depth. But this is not just about Canada; it's about the whole world, the world environment right now. Which we're going to see over the coming year substantial declines in food production globally, substantial declines in fertilizer globally, which will be circular. And you can expect to see in the developing world not just food insecurity, but potentially famine. And famine begets more famine. Famine begets a disease. Famine begets war.
Yeah.
So Canada specifically, 30% reduction will mean that your food prices are going to go up. At the very least, your food prices are going to go up in an environment where we're already dealing with cost of living increases that are not sustainable. And then we're talking about potential food shortages globally and in the country.
Right. So let's start kind of at the beginning of that problem.
Yeah.
Why? For the policymakers who are calling for the reduction, what is their reasoning?
Well, this is part of the same things that are driving carbon taxes. It's a belief that climate change is upon us and that this is a dangerous thing for our sustainability going forward. I think we all want to be responsible stewards of our environment and of our planet. But there are forces that are proposing some things that are revolutionary in nature, and will not necessarily yield the benefits that are being proposed. So, and not to go off on too much of a tangent, but you talk about something like carbon taxes, and they're well intentioned. Let's introduce a cost against carbon so people understand and make better choices around their use and burning of carbon. Sounds good in practice. Sort of sounds good in theory, but in practice, you take a look at a place like Canada, that is a big country and a cold country, and people can't make different decisions. So really all you're doing is saddling expenses on the shoulders of people who really can't change their behaviors. We still have to drive to work. We still have to heat our homes in the winter. This proposal with fertilizer, it's kind of along the same lines. Let's tackle climate change by reducing nitrogen and nitrogen use, and it'll lead to a more sustainable future for us all. But what it in fact actually does is it's like inverse insurance. We fear that in a coming decade, we're going to have a climate that will not be sustainable, and it'll impact things like food production. It'll lead to drought. It'll lead to potential starvation. So what do? Well, right now we reduce fertilizer use, so we guarantee food shortages right now.
So how, there must be a counter argument. Do your best to steel man the counter argument, because the people who are making these policies, I'm sure they're not stupid. So how do you think they in their minds get past that particular problem?
So there is validity in overuse of fertilizer. If you use too much of it, you can contaminate the soil. If you use too much of it, you don't produce more food. You actually burn your food. If you use too much of it, you can have emissions problems. What's being missed in this is that in principle, the bureaucrats who are proposing that we deal with these challenges, they're not farmers. They don't live with the soil. They don't live with the impacts of choices on a farm. They don't live with the environment. Take a look at your typical Canadian farmer. They've been in the business for generations. It is in their inherent interest to ensure that their land is healthy and productive and continues to be productive. It's also in their interest, given fertilizer is expensive, to use as little as possible to gain the greatest benefit that they can. Now, around the world, there can be places where there's been overdevelopment of farming, and it's been irresponsible. Let's take a look at a place like Brazil. Brazil, cutting down rainforests to transform that land into farms. Well, Brazilian soil isn't suited for food production, and it requires substantial amounts of fertilizer to make that land productive. And there is definitely a negative impact in Brazil. Now, the counter is, as much as there is an impact environmentally in places like Brazil, you've got a planet with 7.7 billion people who, over the past 50, 60 years, have benefited incredibly from modern industrialized agriculture. One of the single greatest impacts of the last 50 years of technology development has been the use of nitrogen fertilizer. And I would direct your audience to take a look into the work of Dr. Vaclav Smil, leading authority on nitrous fertilizers. He's working out of the University of Manitoba. So he might be somebody you want to talk to in a little bit more depth on the show. Mm-hmm. But he makes the argument, and he's backed it with science, that the planet is able to sustain this population because of the progress in fertilizers. And if we were to step away from the benefits of these fertilizers, the planet can reasonably hold 2 billion people, not the 7.7, 7.8 billion that we have today.
Well, yeah, it would make sense that as the population grows, which it's continuing to do, we would want to secure as much food as possible to feed a growing population. That just seems like straight logic to me. Does it not to you?
Well, if you take a look at that 2.2 billion versus 7 billion, um, in my view, you're playing with fire when you start talking about drastic reductions in fertilizer use.
Right.
That's not to say that we can't do better all the time, but I think we should all be advocating for incrementality. You do something, you test something, you see the impact of the something that you've done, and you continue down the path as you have progress. You don't do things that are revolutionary. So 30% reduction, to me, that is a revolutionary move. And revolutions hurt people, and you can't predict the dominoes that fall when you do something like this. I just step to the side for a second and touch on your point about population. Another thing that's a bit of a falsehood is that the Earth is continuing to overpopulate, and that we're growing at some enormous clip, some enormous pace. In truth, Europe is actually depopulating. North America is depopulating. You haven't quite seen it yet because you're not paying attention to the replacement numbers, but we have not been having enough children to replace the current population. And case in point, China is about to go through a demographic crisis. The one-child policy has baked in 30 years of not enough replacement population. And in the past year, they've actually seen a population decline, which will accelerate to the extent of depopulation that we've never seen on the planet.
Right. So I've heard that argument made before. Excuse my ignorance, but what would be the drawback of depopulation?
Well, the first and most material is as you have a decline in population, you have a decline in demand. As you have a decline in demand, you see a decline in your economy. As you see a decline in your economy, you have less resources to do things like support social programs.
Mm-hmm.
And
Elon Musk has raised the red flag over depopulation a number of times too.
I'm particularly worried about the picture that I see in China and the sustainability of that regime over the next decade. And you want to get into some really interesting reading. I'll recommend to your audience checking out Peter Zeihan. He's a globalist, global political strategist. And he gets into some of the issues we're talking about today and population piece as well, and makes the argument for the sort of decade we're about to see. But China is depopulating at such a pace that you could see political instability, significant political instability over the next 10 years. And some of the decisions that you see being made right now and some of the rhetoric that you see coming out of the Communist Party of China right now is directly related to trying to continue to hold the reins of power as the country is going through significant instability.
Right. Okay. So let's bring this back into Canada in a sense, but still consider thinking globally. Canada has decided on this 30% reduction. Is this a move that other countries are echoing, or is this just a weird Canadian policy that we've come up with?
Our current government seems to be embracing and wanting to be a leader in a number of spaces in addressing climate change, et cetera. The problem with trying to be the leader in these spaces is, again, you're moving at extreme clip. You're moving faster than your population is prepared for, and you're making changes that you can't understand the consequences of. 30% is I would love someone to explain where they've chosen this number. Where's that come from? Where's your science? Where's your backing? Have you done a business case? Have you broken down what that means for the economy, for food production? And it's funny. And you ask, has what has this been based on? Or others following this path? Well, I'll point to Sri Lanka, which you may have seen in the news over the past few months. Sri Lanka was a country that was lifting itself out of poverty. Were making great strides in agriculture, had an abundance of food, and in the last year, in 2021, their government decided to adopt that globalist agenda and said, we will no longer be using man-made fertilizers. We're only going to use organic fertilizers. They did that overnight, and then in the next growing season, they saw an implosion in agriculture. Mm-hmm. They went from being a country with an abundance of food to a country that was on the basis of starving, over 20% reduction in their outputs and their yields, and a collapse in their exports. They are a big exporter of tea. That went away overnight. And what did that lead to? Significant instability in the country and the fall of that government.
Right.
And that was simply switching from fertilizer A to fertilizer B.
Yeah.
Not recommending a 30% reduction in the fertilizer you use. And this is not to say that there's going to be one-for-one degradation in our ability to grow things in Canada, because we still benefit from having a wonderful geography. But you want to understand the context in which we're discussing this proposal. You want to understand what that will do to us in an environment where globally, in the past year, with the Ukraine war, you've seen significant grain come off the market. So Russia's off the market, Ukraine is off the market. You're seeing drought in Europe and North America, so our yields are already down. You're seeing China hoarding fertilizer. You're seeing Russia no longer exporting fertilizer. Two largest producers of fertilizer in the world. We're already going to be going through. So if we wanted to do a test here in Canada over the next year and a half, we're already going to be going through an environment where we're needing to do more with less. We're going to need to have better yields for the planet, because food production from what has been very reliable sources is going to decline. And I need to hit on that fertilizer point as you're seeing fertilizer production coming off the market. Then you're going to have places like Brazil, which will no longer be able to sustain their agriculture. Mm-hmm. There are 3 countries in the world that can continue to do what they're doing today in some measure without fertilizer. It's Canada, it's the US, and it's France. The only countries that could be productive based on their water, their energy, their geography, their natural fertilizer. It's those 3 countries. Everybody else is a have-not country in this environment. So you would look to a place like Canada to try to fill whatever gap they can, and the States to try and fill whatever gap they can across the world. We're a global country, so not only will we see this suffering globally, but as food comes off the market, then our food prices go up, regardless.
Yep. Right? It seems so silly to me because, there's the old saying, with every crisis comes an opportunity, right? And this particular, we'll call it opportunity, with global shortages in food and in fertilizer, that is an opportunity for Canada to step into the ring and say, hey, we can help. Yeah. And there's 2 ways you can look at it. And the one way is that, well, that's a good economic opportunity for Canada that I don't think we're taking seriously. But more importantly, this becomes very quickly a humanitarian concern.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And in the face of all of those odds, decide we are going to make a decision to reduce our production output just strikes as insanity. And I haven't been able to make it make any sense in my brain.
Well, I would suggest that our current government has not been known for extreme levels of competence.
Right.
If you take a look at our cabinet currently, and you try to understand the background of those people filling these leadership roles, not many of them have done much in their careers, aside be bureaucrats, politicians. So are they suited for the job? a staffer may think the headline is a great idea. We're going to tackle environmental threats, environmental challenges, and we're going to do it in agriculture by reducing fertilizer, because now that's what some body at the UN is saying is a great thing for us to do. No one's done the math. They're making these announcements without looking beyond the borders of Canada as well, and understanding what's going on right now in Europe, what's going on right now in Asia, and what does that mean for this country over the next year, 2 years, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. We'll get into inflation and such, but we're already in an environment where life is tougher, and we're already in an environment where we're dealing with a non-peaceful world. Those are the sorts of macro influences that our leaders should be looking at as they're proposing anything.
Right.
And I think that's not the sort of thing that's going on right now.
I also want to take a look at this from the environmental perspective, because I guess that is the reasoning that they're using to tote this like 30% reduction. You are probably the only person in my life that I know who has read the Paris Climate Accord. So why don't, and we talked about this the last time you were on the show. And if you haven't listened to that episode, guys, I encourage you to go back and listen to it, because it's also very, very good. But why don't you compare Canada's position in total global carbon emissions to some of the other countries in the world, and detail out some of the mess of that accord that people don't really think about?
Thanks for bringing that point up. We, like I said earlier, we all want to do what is right for the environment. And we want a planet that is livable, sustainable, that is vibrant and healthy. If that is our objective, then you want to focus first on those things that are the biggest contributors to a threat against those objectives. Right? China, India, United States, in that order, are the largest contributors to carbon emissions. And strangely, it's a similar lineup when it comes to fertilizer use. Canada is not a player. We are not a contributor in any meaningful way. We produce about 1% of the world's carbon. So you could shut down Canada tomorrow. Just shut Canada ceases to exist, and it will make no impact on the challenge, on the problem. The Paris Climate Accord, it's funny enough, it's a series of objectives that are self-imposed by nations. They put their hand up to say, I'm going to do the following. We are going to do the following. We're going to set the following targets, self-imposed targets. Well, a place like China, which is contributing the most to the carbon challenge, has said that by 2035, they'll stop increasing their carbon output. Not reduction, they'll stop increasing.
Which means India they will increase until 2035.
Yeah. And so anything that we do in this country is essentially economic suicide. We do it to make ourselves feel good. It's not going to help, and it's not going to help solve the problem. It's going to definitely guarantee hardship for our own country. And China can laugh as their rivals are doing this to themselves. The other funny piece, India, they've signed on to have a target by 2035.
Yeah.
I mean, if we were really serious about doing something about reducing carbon, we'd influence those two countries to get off coal and burn natural gas, and that would have their emissions.
Right.
Instead, we're keeping our natural gas in the ground here in Canada.
Yeah.
It's counter to the objective. What are we trying to accomplish here? And then you look at the policymakers who continue to fly around in their private jets as they make these pronouncements. So I have to question, A, have you done the math? Are you incompetent? Or is it something else?
Right. So that basically, as far as I can tell, does that cover kind of like the idea of the fertilizer thing? Or are there pieces that we're still missing? Because I know there's a bunch of other stuff that we want to move on to. And I would like to get to inflation, because inflation is going to be like, if the fertilizer reduction is the left, the inflation would be the right, I imagine. So have we covered kind of the fertilizer thing?
Just to hit on one last point for scale. We talked about contributors to the carbon emissions, well, the math is very similar when it comes to contributors to fertilizer consumption. Canada, we use about 4.8 billion metric tons of fertilizer annually. A place like China uses 45 million metric tons, followed by India, 30 million metric tons. So again, the scale of Canada's contribution to the problem is much smaller than addressing it in these other countries.
There's got to be, sorry, I hate to pause here, but there's got to be a joke in there somewhere about trying to make farming more green, right?
Well, and this is why you sit down and you talk with farmers, and particularly in a place like Canada, they're very, very responsible. Our industries are very, very responsible. You can point to the energy industry in Canada and say, yeah, 15, 20 years ago, we needed to clean up our act, and we have. And we are now able to export very, very green practices around the planet. I mean, the world needs more Canadian energy. You take a look, and it's the same thing with farming. We've had to do well in a difficult country with difficult climate. We've needed to make sure that our land is sustainable, and farmers have done that. They take a look at what is the bare minimum that is required to get the yields that they need, so that their land will continue to produce for generations and generations and generations. You want to talk about somebody who really cares about the environment? That person who makes their livelihood and their children and their grandchildren's livelihood based on the health of that environment.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
We're in, and I'm sorry to say, but we're in, regardless of what we decide to do on this fertilizer front, we are in for a very difficult year globally. And Canada has an opportunity to try and support the globe by producing better yield, not less.
Okay, so if you were to make a prediction, and predictions are sticky because predictions are simply predictions,
Yep.
Do you see a food shortage in Canada? And if so, to what degree and how soon?
So I see a food shortage globally. But see, that impacts us when we go to the grocery store. What happened during the pandemic? You go to the grocery store and you just where's the produce that you're used to? Things got slim there for a while.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Right? Now, we'll be fine up until November, December. What happens when we depend on South America for fresh fruit? Right? And we're going to start to feel this globally this fall. We're going to see the scope of the problem, but the problem is not a singular year problem. It's going to really get bad in 2023 and beyond. And this is just based on the food that's staying in the ground right now that is not coming out of Russia and Ukraine, the disruption in the farming in that area. That's one. But then you play on the fertilizer disruption, and then it spreads broadly. Mm-hmm. We in Canada, we're going to be in a better position than most places. Canada and the States, France, better position than most places. But we'll feel it. And when you've got a global decline in supply, well, again, we can see just with the logistics challenges that we've had post-COVID, through COVID and post-COVID, everything's become more expensive. Well, now when you have less food globally in a global market, everything's more expensive. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's not like we aren't already straining under the burden of inflation. The food piece, will we see starvation in Canada? No. Will we see difficult cost of living in Canada and people having to make difficult choices between how they heat their house and how much they eat? We're already seeing unprecedented demand in food banks in Canada. Yeah. And we're at the start. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, what else do we have to deal with in this environment? Well, we're dealing with rising interest rates. People are feeling that. I have to remind myself and everybody else, we're still at historical lows for interest rates. Mm-hmm. It's one place these are going. That's up. Mm-hmm. And it's going to continue to go up for the foreseeable future. We've seen the price of everything go up, inflation go up. This is kind of circular. We're going to increase the interest rates so we can tap down inflation. But the challenge is much of our inflation is structural. It's based on logistics, global logistics that have fallen apart. You can no longer get the widget you needed for the price that you used to be able to get that widget. And it's going to be some years before we unravel the thorny knots of logistics and production challenges globally. So it's not like increasing the interest rates are going to tap down inflation anytime soon. It'll stifle some demand, but some of the demand is it's not discretionary, like food.
Yeah.
So you've got rising interest rates. You've got global logistics challenges that are making everything more expensive. You have initiated a carbon tax across the country that doesn't just tax carbon. It makes everything a household does more expensive. Everything we purchase more expensive. Everything that needs to move to a store has become more expensive. Right? And
think about your everyday life. What do you on a weekly basis purchase that doesn't move? Frankly, I can't really think of anything. Nothing.
And
maybe my water, because it there's infrastructure built for that, and my electricity, but everything else moves.
Yeah, and the infrastructure for water typically requires concrete, which creates a lot of carbon.
Yeah.
So sorry, that's not immune either. They're just hit on the carbon tax piece again. Sorry if I'm a broken record here.
No, I would love to hit it harder.
The
stupid.
The thinking that went into the rollout of the carbon tax. There were some staffers in Ottawa who said, well, this is going to cost farmers X. So, we need to be prepared to see the impact of X. They forgot entire parts of the industry that create carbon, like drying your grain, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't X, it was 10X, the impact on a farmer. What are their choices? Don't grow things?
And can you shed any light? I was under the impression, and still am under the impression, that profit margin as a farmer is not large, right? So how much space do these Canadian farmers have for all of these squeezes?
Profit margin is selectively large in Canadian farming, where we have ensured a lack of competition. So dairy farming, for instance, in Quebec, 10 families do really, really well. But broadly speaking, no, farming is it's a very rewarding, but it is a tough career. You're not seeing people getting rich until they get into large scale farms. Some corporations are doing well. Some corporations are doing well when they have scale. But it's a difficult business, and it's become much more difficult in the last few years with a series of pressures, but things like the taxes and the decisions around potential reductions in fertilizer and such have made it much more difficult to sustain farming. And if you talk about yields as well, it's scale helps to pay your cost of overhead. As you produce less food, you sell less food. So you make less revenue to cover your overhead. Mm-hmm. So the less you produce, the less you're able to produce, the less you're able to continue to manage that farm. The more likely it is that you may have to give up the farm.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's a circular problem.
Yeah. It just blows my mind. And I know you and I have the capacity, we'll say, to don a tin hat, but you look at the policy and you look at the argument laid out in front of us, and you just have to wonder, like, why? Why are we making such foolish decisions on a national scale?
Well, the political landscape has become, I think it's self-evident. It's become more and more extreme. Both sides. And many issues have gone beyond being policy issues, and they've become religious issues. You believe so fervently in your cause that you've stopped actually thinking critically. And I'll blame the current situation on one of a couple things. Either people are making decisions for headline's sake. Right? It's easy to legislate things, but it's very hard to legislate things you've thought through, you understand the implications of, and all the run-on dominoes that come from the decision you're making. Unfortunately, I think right now we have a very unprofessional government. We can't produce passports. We can't manage airports. We've rolling out something like a carbon tax. Well, great. You roll it out. You think you're doing something for the environment. You're not, because we can't make different choices in Canada. But you got the headlines, and your base believes you're doing something. You're doing something. I use the analogy of when you're on fire. Do you flail about madly, or do you stop, drop, and roll? Well, flailing about madly is an action. It's not going to help you out that much.
Yeah, you're doing
carbon
something.
tax is an action. You're doing something, but it's not going to help you out that much. If we were serious about the environment, we'd be talking more about nuclear power plants.
Absolutely. Or how we can pressure some of these other nations like India or China to clean up their act. Because again, you said it, and I'll echo it. We all want to be good stewards of our planet. We all want to live in a greener space. We all want to ensure that generations going forward have an incredible place to live. It's the old saying that you want to leave the place you're in better condition than what you found it, right? If you had a good mom, you got taught that. And I think a lot of us got taught that. But understanding that Canada represents about 8%, taxing Canadians additional dollars when they can't really change their their behaviors anyway isn't a realistic way about going about fixing the problem.
Exactly.
You're right. It's great for headlines, but it's not great for the actual issue. Am I correct in understanding that China is in fact still using a lot of coal?
Largest coal user on the planet.
Right.
Yes.
So what can we do?
Continue to increase that consumption.
Yeah. So what can we do to why are we not having that conversation? What can we do about cleaning up China's coal use? And again, opportunity. What if we became a nuclear powerhouse in the energy sector, and we're able to supply some of these dirtier places with clean energy that's good for the environment at a nice cut for Canada? It all makes so much sense, does it not?
Well, and regardless of the political party, I'd make an ask to anyone in a position of policy development. Number one, stop, focus on your objective, and ask yourself, is the policy being proposed actually in line with the objective you're proposing? Mm-hmm. Think critically about what you're proposing. Understand the dominoes from what you're proposing. What else will be impacted by what you're proposing?
Yeah.
Do the homework, do the math, and then deploy it incrementally in small steps where you can see the impact of what you've just done and you can adjust.
Yeah, shorten that feedback loop. Maybe don't start at a 30% reduction in fertilizer.
Don't start at 30%.
Maybe start at a 3% reduction and just see what happens.
And every year we're going to try and do that much better. Every year we're going to try and do that much better. We will be under the natural pressure with what we're going to see as food shortages and fertilizer shortages to have to do better anyways. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? The test is upon us.
Yeah. Yeah. Whether we like it or not. We glossed over something that I would like to spend a little bit more time on. Rising interest rates in Canada. They are rising. They are continuing to rise. Okay. What are your projections around that, and what's the thought process there?
Well, we are still at historically low rates. Right? There is, your natural rate of interest over the past 20, 30 years has been between 1% and 10%. The move by the Bank of Canada in the last rate increase signaled that they're going to be aggressive in chasing the rates up. But because structurally, much of the inflation that we're facing right now is based on things that aren't just about demand specifically in Canada, but about global logistics, about the nearshoring of production, bringing production back to North America. With those structural changes, we're going to see things cost more. Period. It's going to happen regardless of what we do with interest rates. We're going to continue to see these interest rates increase over the coming year because they won't have actually addressed the problem. Right. Where are they going to stop? I don't know. Where do the policymakers of the Bank of Canada start to blink? Don't know. But I will say that they're with us for the next couple of years, at the very least.
That's
the cost of living in general, as well as interest rate increases.
Yeah, that's a horrifying realization for anyone who's fresh into the housing market.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing.
The other thing in terms of cost of borrowing, money has been plentiful. Money invested in businesses has been plentiful for the past 30, 40, 50 years. As the boomers retire, they're going to be taking their investments out of the market and they're going to be putting them into safe and secure things. And we're going to see money won't be free any longer. So that goes away, and that will introduce, again, scarcity in investment dollars. And everything will become more expensive.
So you see at least a notable market correction in, call it, the next 10 years to be safe.
I'd say the next 3 years are going to be very interesting to begin with. Of the planet, Canada, United States, North America in general will likely do okay, but the transition won't be comfortable. And we're going from an environment where we've had the peace dividend since 1989. We didn't really have to invest in militaries, to a world that is very clearly right now a much more dangerous place.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the cost of securing your borders has become more expensive. You're going to have, you're seeing the challenges in energy security. You're seeing the challenges in a global world turning back into a regional world. We luckily, within the borders of North America, have pretty much everything we need to be successful, but that transition will not be comfortable.
Mm-hmm. I support us spending more military dollars, and this is a bit of an aside, but I think as a fully developed, first world Western country, to have a strong military isn't going to be bad for us, and I would support federal dollars going into that sort of thing. Obviously the United States is a whole other thing. Their spending is massive, and I don't think that we're ever going to be that, at least not in any amount of short term. But again, I've been churning around this idea in my brain about Canada, kind of not taking itself seriously. I think part of being a big boy nation is having a strong military presence. And maybe this is the catalyst that pushes us in that direction. I don't know.
So there's a wide range of reasons why you want to have a strong military. And one of the bigger things is it's not necessarily about fighting the fight. It's about having the ability to fight the fight, be taken seriously politically, and being taken seriously on a national stage. And right now, Canada has proven itself to be not a serious nation. We do benefit by having 3 oceans around us. The likelihood of invasion, very, very low. But that's not the case with our allies. And if we can't bring something to the table that's meaningful, when we talk about other issues like trade agreements, will we be taken seriously? And the answer is no. If you're not bringing value to the table, so there's a number of reasons why we would want to have a healthy military, and fundamentally, because the world is becoming a more dangerous place, we do need to invest and take this seriously. We do need a navy. We do need a real navy. We need to get on board with that Air Force that we've neglected for the past 40 years. It's not something that's optional. Right? It would be useful for us to get into a conversation at some point on what it takes to be a great nation. And there's so many things about Canada that we've been blessed with. We could punch well above our weight and be a force for good with a little bit of forethought. And things like being a supplier of energy to the world in a moral way, being a supplier of rare minerals to the world in a moral way, being a supplier of food to the world, being a guarantor of security alongside our allies. The reason why America has been spending so much on their military for the past 60 years is because they were building a global trade order and ensuring that you could travel the seas and you could move exports around the world. Well, they're not that interested in doing that anymore. Mm-hmm. And something's going to have to fill the gap.
Yeah, I just think it's time for Canada to step up in general. Obviously, I'm a Canadian. I think very highly of my country. One of my most memorable high school moments was learning about the World Wars in history class. I loved history class. And there's one particular battle in World War I called Vimy Ridge, where it as far as I can tell, it's the only moment in history where Canada as a military really stepped up to the plate and moved the needle in a meaningful way. And if you're not familiar with the event, guys, definitely do some reading on it. It's incredible. It was so incredible. It happened during World War I in France. It's so incredible that if you go to France and you go to this place, Vimy Ridge, France actually gave that geographical location, that soil, to Canada. It is Canadian soil. There's not a border, but you were stepping into Canada because of what Canada did for the Allies in World War I. And why would we not want to walk into the future as a nation capable of doing those sorts of things? The drawback too, though, that I think about is, if we're going, because there's no question about it, the world is beginning to spin more and more out of control. Things are getting more and more dicey by the day. And Russia invading Ukraine is just the most recent thing that we have to talk about, but it's been happening for a while. If Canada makes the decision, and I haven't sorted this out in my brain, but if Canada makes the decision, if we make the call and we say, okay, cool, we want to be a player on the stage, we're going to start building a military, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And you best believe that the nations that we're not necessarily aligned with will take note of that. And, that also creates a potential arms race, which is a scary thought. What are your thoughts on if you were the leader of the country right now and you decided we were going to build a military? What do you think is a responsible way of going about doing that?
Well, I think there's also a couple historical points I want to hit on when you talk about Vimy, because you also probably want to talk about D-Day and Juno Beach. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about the liberation of Italy, and you also want to talk about the liberation of the Netherlands, all of which Canada was on the spearhead of.
Yeah, that's fair.
But to the point of responsible development, we're already in an arms race, regardless of what Canada does. Right? We're already in an arms race. It's between what's going on in Europe right now and the rearmament of places like Germany and Poland, but also in the Pacific in a very, very big way with the Communist Party of China wanting to have bigger stature on the planet, and those things we talked about earlier where China will be less stable over the coming decade. We don't have a choice. We're in an environment where all countries are up-arming, all countries that can. How do we do this responsibly? Well, first off, we have to have objectives. What sort of a power are we going to be, and where are we going to focus our investment? We're never going to be United States, but there are some things that we can bring to the table and contribute with. And it's actually having an understanding of where strategically we are going to focus. I think that's key. And I think right now we continue to try to just fill a hole here, fill a hole there, fill a hole here, fill a hole there. But it's very, very apparently random with not much of a plan. Step one we'd want to lean very much into the defense of North America. So updating our northern missile defense and our capabilities in that space is key. And it's a requirement of being part of NORAD. But given we're in a world now with hypersonic missiles and all the rest, and you've got Russia saber rattling with their nuclear claims on a daily basis right now, you probably want to be able to at least protect your airspace over North America. That would be a focus. What can we bring to the table for NATO? NATO is one of our biggest advantages, being a part of that. But we haven't been a serious player. We haven't been meeting our obligations. If we were called to tomorrow, we would not have a lot of capabilities to bring to the table. But just meeting the basic obligations that we have as part of our existing relationships would be a priority. Being serious when it comes to our own security and the sorts of decisions we're making with states that don't share our moral set, the sorts of things that we have not been doing with the Communist Party of China. We have not been seriously calling out issues, the Uyghurs. We have not been serious about excluding things like Huawei in our infrastructure. Our allies have noticed that. There's a reason why Australia, United States, UK have gone off and have continued to produce new arrangements for themselves in the Pacific and have excluded us. It's because we're not a trustworthy partner. Mm-hmm. So getting our priorities straight, actually having a plan, investing in things that fundamentally shore up the defense of our country. And those are all places to start. But this is a huge topic to get into, and we'll probably require another hour of our time.
Another episode. Yeah. Again, it just comes back to this feeling I have that we're a country that doesn't yet take itself seriously.
Through points in time, we've had sturdy hands on the steering wheel. Again, trying to not be beholden or focused on one party versus another party. I'll give the Liberal Party under Chrétien and Paul Martin. We were a serious nation. Mm-hmm. We're making serious decisions. We were grappling with our debt, and we were making the right economic and energy development decisions. Under Harper, a boring government. Thank God for a boring government. It was a steady hand at the wheel. I really look forward to more boring incrementality, more forethought, more analysis, slower decision making, and less revolutionary decision making, and we would all benefit from that, and we would be a serious power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but that's a lot of work.
Well, it takes a high level of intentionality.
Yeah,
level of intentionality. At the risk of taking too much of your time, I want to open one more can of worms. Where do you think in this whole picture that we've talked about today, the World Economic Forum sits, and what hand are they playing, in your estimation, in what's happening in our country right now? Go.
Okay. So it's not a tinfoil hat. It's an aluminum foil toque. Be clear. It's not a conspiracy when they tell you what they're doing and when they're very open and honest about what they're doing. It's not a conspiracy when they're within the law, what they're doing. But the World Economic Forum will tell you, Klaus will tell you that, and quote, he has penetrated the Canadian government. He's very happy to see that someone like Justin Trudeau is a huge proponent of what they are selling.
Didn't he claim he had under his, I don't have a word for it, but direction, maybe like 2/3 of the Trudeau cabinet?
I won't come up with a specific number, but it was a significant influence,
a large amount
in our cabinet.
A large amount.
And if you go to the WAF homepages themselves, you can see that people like Chrystia Freeland, she's one of their leaders. She's there on their website. Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh, Mark Carney. These are all very influential people who believe in the sorts of things that the WF is selling. Again, putting conspiracies to the side, I don't think it's ever a healthy thing when your government is beholden to any foreign influence. Our government's first responsibility is to its own people, its own nation, the good of Canada first. The good of Canada first before you try to solve world problems. Mm-hmm. In fact, if you focus on the good of Canada first, well, you should be a more healthy nation to do more positive things on the world stage. And if you get into and read, I've read Klaus's book, The Great Reset. He's telling you within the book what he wants to do, and it's very, very socialist in nature. It's another flavor of communism if you really want to get into the weeds. Lots of magic unicorn dust in their economic recommendations. And I don't see extra-national organizations as being the sorts of things that we should be allowing to influence our own public policy.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, Canada's policy should come from within Canada, not from any exterior force, especially any exterior force that I have no power to cast a vote for, Yeah,
exactly. It comes down to your best governments are your most local governments. Mm-hmm. Right? And the government that has the most influence on your day-to-day is probably your municipal government. Mm-hmm. Small, close to you. Big advocate of more democracy and not less, and big advocate of smaller government.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's bring this all home for you, so we can get you out of here. We've painted a fairly grim picture, right? Yeah. The good news is that it sounds like Canada might be in better shape than a lot of places. That's a good start. But what should people be doing in preparation for what is seemingly inevitably coming?
Yeah, to underline the challenges that the normal Canadian families are going to face over the next couple of years, we're going to continue to see the impact of carbon taxes making life more expensive, but we're also going to see tax rates go up in general, based on the fact that the world is becoming a more dangerous place. And we have so much debt in this country. So taxes are going to be tougher on us. Interest rates are going to be tougher on us. The cost of goods because of shortages globally, tough on us. Getting things that you've typically been able to go to a store and just pick up, we will continue to have challenges in everything from semiconductors to bicycles. We're going to feel the impact of international war. We already are seeing what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, and that will impact food, that'll impact fertilizer. All of this means that life will become more uncertain over the next few years and more expensive. So you can't do anything about that as an average Canadian. What you can do is make sure that you have your own house in order. So right now, if you have the opportunity to save or reduce expenses that are discretionary, reduce them. This is not the time to go on a big trip. It's probably the time to stick that money in a sock under your mattress. Ensure that you're gainfully employed. Probably not a great time to take risks with your career. Probably a good time to just make sure that you are employed, and even if you're not super happy in your job, do a good job, work hard, stay in your job. And then think very clearly around the sorts of experience you want to have in your leadership in government. I'd be voting as boring as possible right now.
That's a funny way to describe voting. But boring, you're right. Boring in politics is not a bad thing. Boring would be nice.
Boring would be very, very nice because we're going to have enough excitement across the board over the next few years. As a country and across North America, we are in a better position to deal with the changes that are coming than other places on the planet, but transitions are never real comfortable. Nearshoring ultimately is going to be great for our industry. Producing things in Canada, again, going to be great for us longer term. But in the meantime, as you're bringing these the production in-house, you're going to be dealing with maybe things are not going to be as cheap as they were using slave labor in China.
Yeah. But I mean, but that's a good problem to have in more than one way because it puts jobs in Canada, and it is a step forward. Although it feels like a small one, but it is a step forward to doing something right about the global situation of slavery.
Exactly. Again, when we say we believe in certain things, then our actions should be in line with what we state our beliefs are.
You can't just say it, folks.
Yeah, can't just say it.
Yeah.
Back it up with your decisions.
Yeah. Well, Tim, thank you so much, man. It's always a pleasure to have you. It's always scary to have you.
Sorry. I'm sorry. If it's any consolation, I'm losing sleep too.
But we appreciate the conversation. We just want to thank you for your time. You're an incredible person to talk to. And we look forward to the next one, man.
It's always great having a conversation with you, Zach. Take care.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at TheCAD That's the CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their